So I was thinking about what causes change and what kind of makes people want to learn more and create these new things that are coming about in today's society. So I was thinking about other professions, and so first I thought, okay, well, when a mechanic sees a new car, they stare, they're intrigued, they want to know more. When an architect sees a new building, they stare, they want to know more, they want to know more about the structure and how it was built. When a software creator sees a new coding, they want to know more about the coding and how it was created. When doctors see that a new disease has been cured, they want to know how it was cured. They stare, they look at the problem and try and figure out more about it. As an athletic trainer, when I see prosthetic limbs being used in sport or being used in just daily activities, I often find myself staring and wanting to know more about how I can help that person or that athlete. So here I have a blade, which is the newest form of prosthetics in track and field. And track and field is where we see most of prosthetics in sports. And then I wanted to find something else that we don't see very often. So I was able to find someone using a prosthetic hand in baseball. And then just the growth over time of prosthetics. We've come a long way in a short period of time so that people can use their prosthetics in a manner that's more like their normal body. So in the 1800s was the first modern prosthetic, which we can see from the blade is a lot different. But I just wanted you guys to see how much we've grown and how far technology has come in a short period of time. So first of all, I found an article from Clark in 1996, which is a long time ago, but this is when prosthetics were becoming more popular. And it talks about energy systems. So athletes, obviously, and any active people were using our energy systems. So to explain the main energy systems a little bit in detail, especially I said in track and field, we're using the prosthetics. So endurance athletes, they need oxygen to be able to get their muscles working. The muscles need oxygen to be able to perform your activities. So they did a study, and they had able-bodied people and people using these intelligent prostheses. And they found that the people using the intelligent prosthesis were using 10% less oxygen. So they were able to run longer without getting tired or breaking down their bodies. So 10% might not seem like a lot, but for an endurance athlete or someone who's trying to perform at a very high intensity or at peak performance, 10% can mean a big difference on that larger stage. So next is gait. So we talked about energy systems and how that the prosthetics change that, but a big thing again in prosthetics that affects the people using them is gait. So for us, everyone here is an able-bodied person. We have a gait phase. So we have a heel strike where you kind of lift your toe off and you put your heel down on the ground, and then the toe off where you're pushing off your toe and you're activating your gastroc muscles or your calf muscles, and then a swing phase where you're swinging your leg through to do another heel strike. For people with prosthesis, especially prosthetic legs, they can't complete this gait phase because they can't activate the certain muscles to move their foot. They don't have ankle movement. So they're changing their gait completely, which changes, it's a kinetic chain, it changes all of the muscle movements up their kinetic chain. So especially for someone who gets a prosthetic later in life, this is going to change how they move and how they perform daily activities. And something I also just wanted to touch on was muscle memory. So all of us, we don't think about our gait phase when we're walking. When we're walking to class, we're not thinking, our minds just go wherever. But for someone with a prosthetic, they have to think about it. They have to recreate that muscle memory to figure out their new normal gait. So these are things that people with prosthetics struggle with. And as an athletic trainer or a medical professional, we would have to help people with prosthetics learn their new gait phase and recreate that muscle memory. So some pros and cons of prosthetics. There's definitely a lot when looking at both sides. I already talked about energy saving and the oxygen consumption. And then another pro is reduced muscle fatigue. So there was an article by Beckman in 2016, and what they found was that someone who has prosthetics, they have less muscle. So again, going back to the oxygen, but also ATP, which is what creates that energy in our bodies, is not being used as frequently because they have less muscle. So if I'm running for a great deal of time, usually your calves would get sore, or your you wouldn't be able to push off as well. But because they don't have that calf muscle, or they don't have that ankle to push off of, it's not going to fatigue. So that is a pro that definitely changes their overall performance. Another pro, they're closer to normal than if they didn't have the prosthetic at all. So they're actually able to perform in sports or activities of daily living. And then most prosthetics are made of a super light material. So if I was to have a prosthetic arm, the arm is going to weigh less than what my normal arm would be. So they're carrying around less weight, and they're doing their activities with less weight, which overall, again, affects their energy system. Some cons I talked about earlier, the gait cycle, and then phantom limb, which a lot of people who have blunt trauma or amputees have this phantom limb syndrome, and they experience pain in the limb that they no longer have. And a lot of it is due to the nerve endings being cut off. But again, as an athletic trainer, how am I going to treat someone for their pain in their lower leg that they don't have anymore? So that causes a lot of problems, and we'll have to change the education to be able to figure out how we would deal with those pains that they're having, because you can't just ignore someone who's having pain like that. And then again, the lack of nerve conduction sensors. So we can't, a person with prosthetics, they can't at this time feel what's happening, or they can't control their limb, other than knowing what movements they have to do with the rest of their body to make it move correctly. So in the future, hopefully, this won't any longer be a con, but at this time, it is something that definitely impairs their activities. So I wanted to see how many people this affected, because as an athletic trainer now, we don't really see this very often, if at all. And so I found a study by Garrow in 2014 of people. They sent out like 35,000 sheets or surveys, and they got a little over 3,000 back, and it was about foot pain. So how much foot pain were you having, what were your symptoms, how it affected your daily life. And they found that 748 of those 3,000 reported pain, and 3% of women and 8% of men recorded that there was disabling pain. So if prosthetics become more and more common, they become more price effective and a lower cost, then I can see this 19% of people who are having disabling pain using the prosthetics, and therefore we'd see the prosthetics more and more often. We'd have to know a lot more about how to fix that gait phase, how to fix the muscle memory, how to teach them how to use it, and it would definitely affect us in a big way if prosthetics do become more common. And this is just 3,000 people, 19% of 3,000 people. So on a larger scale, if you think about that, that's going to be a ton of people that are using prosthetics. So the future of prosthetics, where are we going? Technology is growing, and we're getting more and more tech savvy. We're looking at being able to have sensation in our prosthetics, being able to touch and feel and hold someone's hand. That's a big thing that they're working on right now. And then nerve impulse control and spinal cord connection. So being able to tell my leg that I want to lift it without having to kind of swing my whole body. Being able to bend my knee without really thinking super hard about it. Just being able to send those impulse controls down to tell my body what it's supposed to do, like you would do with any other muscle. And then another future thing of prosthetics that would give our athletes a bigger advantage was being able to, if we do connect the nerves and we are connected to the spinal cord, what's stopping the prosthetic from moving as fast as I want it to move, as fast as I tell it to move. So that's something that could affect it in a big way. And then regulation of sport. So in the NCAA, as an athletic trainer, we have to regulate the supplements that athletes take. The NCAA has guidelines, they have rated drugs that you can or cannot take. And that's really big, not only in the NCAA, but in pro sports as well. Some of the things that are watched very closely is testosterone, vitamins, caffeine, and pre-workout. And all of these things were listed by Walbring in 2012. They went over the NCAA restrictions. So one thing that I know we don't really think about is caffeine. We're in college, we all drink caffeine or have caffeine supplements in some sort of way. So to think that caffeine affects performance and is regulated by the NCAA in a big way, and you can lose your match or whatever just because your caffeine intake, is really crazy to think about when we're thinking that people are running around on like springs. So it's crazy to think that there's no current committee for prosthetics and regulation of the prosthetics. So no one's saying, oh yes, this is allowing them to perform at the same level as normal human beings. And again, athletic trainers monitor these regulations. So how is this going to change my profession? Athletic trainers work with the Paralympic Games, so again, we're going to have to become more in tune with what's going on with the prosthetics and how it's affecting their athletics. And then somehow in the future, we're going to have to learn more about basic mechanics of prosthetics, how the hinge joint's going to work, how they're going to move differently, what goes into making the prosthetics, how we can fix the prosthetics if that's needed. And this happens in all populations, not just athletics. We can work in the industrial setting, we can work in the military, so how are those being implemented in those places? And then monitoring for the future regulations of the prosthetics in the sport, because I definitely see there being regulations on what they can and can't use as prosthetics in the future.